Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Technique Tuesday for February 2024, just in case you're watching on catch up. It's lovely to have you here, and I know that there's going to be several ways that you are watching this broadcast. You might be watching me via catch up, either on YouTube or on my blog. You might be watching me live on YouTube. However you are watching me this morning, you are very, very welcome. And just in case you see me glancing off to the right hand side every now and again, it's not because I have lost my attention, it's because I have got the live chat up. So if you are watching me live this morning and you're there lurking around on YouTube, you're very welcome, and do get involved, do join in. Just find the comments section. There's a live chat going on as we speak, and if you're watching on catch up and you're actually on YouTube, you'll be able to follow that chat too. So no matter how you're tuning in this morning, you are very welcome. Now, just in case you haven't met me before, my name is Ali Board and I bring you Technique Tuesday every month, and it's in line with our theme of the month. We've had various subjects going on. This month the theme is I have to get this in the right order: Amethyst, Lavender and Violet. Now, I called it that simply to give me lots of scope to be able to tackle all sorts of subject matter. Some of the things are going to be because they are that actual subjects. So we might have been looking at a few amethyst deceiver toadstools. We might be looking at some lavender in a tutorial that is coming up. But today's Technique Tuesday is all about how to mix violet. Now, this is a technical one, so strap yourselves in and you might want a notebook. But before I get to that, I've got a little bit of housekeeping, if that's okay. I want to say good morning to anybody who I haven't already said good morning to in the chat. Trudy, Hillary, Jilly, lots of comments coming in, lots of questions already. And if you are watching live, that's the place to put the questions. I will try my hardest to see them all, and I will try very hard to answer them live. If you're watching this on catch up and you still have a question for me, there's plenty of opportunity for you to ask it. You can pop it into the comments on the YouTube channel, or if you are on my blog, there's a little section. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll be able to see a comment section there. I will show you where to go and find those things at the end of the broadcast. Now, something that you can do to help me, if it's okay to ask, if you are on my YouTube channel, please hit subscribe. That's a little kind of red bar with a bell in the corner somewhere. It just helps me enormously. You don't necessarily have to buy a tutorial or any of those kind of things with me. All of this stuff helps. So if you're on YouTube, click subscribe. If you're on my social media channels, can you not only just like things, but could you follow me? Could you share my posts with others? And I know this is a bit of a plea, but honestly, every little tiny bit helps. I'm sure by now that you understand how the social media works in terms of the more people that see me, the more people that see me, and the more opportunity I have to bring you broadcasts like Technique Tuesday. Now, there's lots of information and things to give you towards the end of the broadcast, but shall we go over to that overhead camera, because I've got things that I want to share with you ahead of talking about how to mix violet. Now, Rosie has just put in the chat, hope you're going to show us how to mix Moonglow. Not possible. Not possible, Rosie. It is a magical, magical pigment, but I'm going to talk more about Moonglow later. So if you have done a bit of colour theory, then some of what I say is not going to be news to you. If you've never really studied colour theory, then all of this might blow your brains ever so slightly, for which I am sorry, not sorry. I will try to make it as simple as I can, and let's help you to understand how to mix those colours and how to get the best out of your watercolours. Let's go to that overhead camera. Now, I have, this is going to be a bit of show and tell at the start, but I promise you it will all make sense. I'm going to be specifically talking about watercolours today, and it's really important that you understand why I'm talking about watercolours. It's because whilst colour theory, and here we have a pre-bought colour wheel, you can buy these from any decent art materials retailer. Colour theory is always talking in general terms. So we might be talking about acrylic, we might be talking about oil, pastel, ink, all sorts of things. And so colour theory can only go so far when you're talking about things generally. So for example, on this colour wheel, you might see that it's quite a clever little mechanism. So you turn this round. So because we're talking about violet today, let's have a look at this little part of the colour wheel, which shows you what happens when you mix violet with white. Now that is grand. If you're talking about acrylic, oil, gouache, possibly even ink, definitely pastels, but you don't tend to talk about adding white when we talk about watercolour paints. We tend to use the white of the paper, don't we? So some of the colour wheels that you can pre-buy are useful because they give you a bit of colour theory. So for example, here on the back, let's just turn it round for you. What they do, let's get to violet, is that they show you the difference between actual violet, a tint, a tone, and a shade. So a tint is where you add white, a tone is where you add shade, is where you add black even, and I'll start again. A tint is where you add white, a tone is where you add grey, and a shade is where you add black. So again, not all of this is particularly specific to watercolours. Now there's another little bit of information that I want to share with you. When we're talking about colour theory, we are also talking in general terms because we're talking about, let me spin it round so it's the right way up. We're also talking about the difference between primary colours and secondary colours. There's all sorts of others, I know, and before you start saying, oh, but there's tertiary colours and all sorts of things, I understand that. And there's going to be things that I miss out today, but I'm missing them out on purpose because I don't get the opportunity to have a conversation with you in one of these broadcasts. I have to just kind of say it as it is. And so we don't necessarily get the opportunity to discuss the intricacies of it. So for the most part, we're talking about 3 primary colours. So a primary colour is something that cannot be mixed to achieve it. And so there are 3 primary colours. There is yellow, blue, and red. Okay, actually, I've just noticed that when I do my colour wheel, I do it in a different order than this. So this might be a bit confusing. Anyway, so yellow, blue, and red. Those are colours that cannot be mixed to achieve them. You can achieve variations of them, but in primary terms, this kind of very bright yellow, very bright blue, and very bright red. So theoretically, from those 3, you should be able to mix any other colour that you want, okay? And that usually means our secondary colours. So yellow and blue make green, blue and red make violet, not purple. I'll talk more about that in a bit. And red and yellow make orange. And then these in-between ones are what happens if you kind of shift it one way or the other. So let's do the violet thing, shall we? So here we've got our blue, here we've got our red, and if we mix those together, we get violet. If we put a little bit more blue in the mix than we do red, we get a blue violet. And if we put a little bit more red in the mix, we get red violet, okay? I'll let you take a couple of seconds to digest that. And the reason that I'm so emphatic about this being violet and not purple is because in the Western world, we have too many words to describe our colours. We like to describe them poetically a lot of the time. We have variations on colours where the words have come from dyes or pigments or from what they are made of, all sorts of things. But when we're talking about colour theory, we are also talking about the mechanics of colour. So we have to acknowledge in all of this that there are the mechanics of light as well. And if you know your spectrum well, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, purple doesn't occur in there, okay? I know indigo is much discussed. If you are a bit of a colour geek like me, I know that indigo is much debated. I understand that. But you definitely have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet. Because if you think about it logically, the other end of that spectrum is infrared. So if we went this end off the spectrum, we'd have infrared, and on the other end of the spectrum, we'd have ultraviolet, wouldn't we? So purple doesn't occur in there. Purple is a word that we give. Yeah, Hilary has quite rightly pointed out, we have mauve as well. There's books written on the history of mauve. So I know, for example, I'm going to go back to my front on camera. I'm surrounded by it today, and I am just as bad. I wouldn't call this violet. I wouldn't say welcome to my violet studio. I use violet in all of my marketing. I would say purple. I get it. So it's all down to semantics as well as science. So we have to be a little bit careful when we use vocabulary in terms of colour mixing, because we have to make sure that we're talking about violet and not purple. Actually, technically, purple is much closer to this colour. It's more like a maroon colour. If you think about it in terms of papal robes, that kind of thing, that kind of very red, warm, sort of deep burgundy, technically that's what purple is, okay? Thus endeth the lesson on the difference between violet and purple. But let's go back to this colour wheel and talk about why the yellow, blue and red in our primary colours doesn't always work, okay? Technically, like I said before, you should be able to take a yellow, take a blue and mix any green that you want from it. Take a blue, take a red, mix any violet from it. Take a red, take a yellow, mix any orange from it. But actually, that doesn't work as well as a 6 primary system. So here we've got a 3 primary system, 1 yellow, 1 blue, 1 red, and actually a 6 primary system works better. So let me take you to a couple of colour wheels that I have already painted to explain that further for you. Here we go. It's like any of you English viewers will understand. Here's one I made earlier. Okay, so here we have a couple of 6 primary colour wheels. They're slightly different from each other. I will explain both of them. And don't worry, I am going to do some proper mixing for you in a minute. I just want to describe the theory to you before we talk about the practice. So on this colour wheel, we have the 1 yellow, the 1 red, and the 1 blue. But what this does is illustrate that actually a 6 primary system is better because you can get a better variation of colours out of it. So what it does is it takes 2 yellows, 2 reds and 2 blues and talks about colour bias. So if we have a look at this yellow here, here is lemon yellow. And lemon yellow is quite acidic and it already has a green bias. So when we're mixing greens, it is sometimes a much better option to get brighter, fresher greens than it is if we chose a yellow that has an orange bias. So this is my yellow, this is Bee's Gold. So here you can see we've got 2 primary colours. We've got 2 yellows, you can't mix these yellows. We've got lemon yellow and we've got Bee's Gold. One which is biased towards the greens we're trying to mix, and one which is biased towards the oranges that we're trying to mix. And then what you get is a much kind of fresher, brighter, easier way of getting to our colours faster. Okay, so that's my 2 yellows on this wheel. Coming down to the reds, I've chosen for this colour wheel Scarlet Lake and Quinacridone Magenta. That's the one that no one can ever spell. So our Scarlet Lake, as you can see very clearly on this colour chart, is already biased towards oranges. So when I mix it with the Bee's Gold, these are the oranges that I get. And the Quinacridone Magenta is already biased towards my violets. So it becomes much easier to get to the colours I'm trying to mix faster. Let's go over to the blues. Now, the blues are sometimes much contested, and that's why I've got a second colour wheel over here. Because a lot of blues could be either So I've chosen for this one, I've chosen cerulean blue for my green biased blue, and I've chosen Prussian blue for my violet biased blue. Now I know that there's going to be some of you out there who say, don't be daft, Ali. Prussian blue is very clearly a green biased blue. I understand that. But so are a lot of blues green biased. You can mix some really useful greens out of pretty much any blue you come across. So it's all relative. So when you're choosing your blues, and yes, I could have gone for a different blue, which we'll talk about when we come over here. There are many variations on this because instead of lemon and bees gold, I could have perhaps gone for a real and cadmium yellow. I could have gone for cadmium red and alizarin crimson. I could have gone for French ultramarine and cobalt blue. The thing is, the more you do of this, the more you understand the subtleties of it. So if we pay attention to our violets on this colour wheel, can you see I've got my violet biased blue here in Prussian, I've got my violet biased red in here in quinacridone, and there we get some really nice, fresh, bright looking violets. So I'm just going to let you take that in. I know that who was saying to me, June, good morning, June. She was saying can't write fast enough. So I'll give you a couple of seconds while I look at the hellos in the comments to catch up with that. Who have I not said good morning to this morning? I haven't said good morning to Fran, to Teresa, to Nuala, good morning, Anne, Sheena. Some people use a different name on their YouTube channel. So if I don't say hello to you, just because I don't know who I'm saying hello to, good morning to everybody. Michelle, good morning, is saying just dipping in briefly while waiting for a meeting online. And the lovely Anita, good morning, Anita. In-house artist at the SAA. She's in the room as well. Lovely to have you here, Anita. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. So that's one version. I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. I just want to briefly tip over into this one to show you some variations. Okay, so here I've gone for Windsor Lemon, so made by Winsor & Newton. Good morning, Dyra. I've gone for Windsor Yellow here, so a more orange biased one. Scarlet Lake makes an appearance again. I really like using Scarlet Lake for colour theory because it's really bright, clean and very orange biased. But here I've got Permanent Rose instead of Quinacridone Magenta. So there's a thought for you. And over here I've gone for Ultramarine and I've gone for Windsor Blue Green shade. So again, you could use your French Ultramarine for your greens. But because I've put it next to Windsor Blue Green shade, which you can very clearly see is green biased, I've got a different take on it. So it doesn't really matter which colours you go for when you create a colour wheel. What matters is their relativity. So is one more green biased than the other one, which is orange biased? So here on this colour wheel, I've gone for 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15. This is a 15 colour wheel. And over here, I'm counting them because I can't remember, even though I drew them. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 21 colour wheel. Why are those two things different? You could go for a 9 colour wheel if you wanted to go for, yes, Julia's saying heaps of combinations. This is a never-ending thing. Once you get started down the road of colour theory, if it interests you, it never stops. I've been doing this for 25 years and I still learn something every single time I do it. Let's take you to the 15 colour wheel first. We'll blot out the other one so it doesn't get confusing. What I've done is I've put my 2 yellows, my 2 reds, 2 blues on here. And in between, so let's use our violet as an example. Permanent Rose Ultramarine. In the middle is my violet. And if I put more red in it, I've got red violet. And if I put more blue in it, I've got blue violet. Very similar to that pre-purchased colour wheel in terms of the number of sections that we've got on here. Yes, Hilary, it is definitely a rabbit hole. A beautifully multicoloured rabbit hole, but a rabbit hole nevertheless. Now this one in the 21, and you can go on and on and on and on doing this. This one, if we take our violet, so there's our blues, there's our reds, there's our violet in the middle, there's our red violet, so the one that's got lots more red in it than blue, but I've gone one in between those things. So this one's got a bit more red, but can you see? So this one is using the gradations towards red. This one is using the gradations towards blue. So this in effect technically could go on to infinity, couldn't it? But you can push this as much as you like. You will construct one. They're quite tricky to construct. We'll look at that in just a second. And they are quite difficult to put together because you kind of have to know what it is that you're looking for. But the good news is, if you're watching this, screenshot this or use your smartphone to take a photograph of it. Then what you can do is you've got me as a little bit of a guide to talk you through it. Okay, phew. That's the technical part of today. Well, that's the talking technical part of today. What I want to take you through now is how you might go about constructing one of these and the things that you want to look for. I'll stick those down to one side because I have a feeling that you're going to have questions about it. Okay. June is saying, June has been to some of my sessions before, and she's saying she's completed 3 sketchbooks of colour mixing. Looks like she's going to need another one. Yeah, this isn't going to end for you, but I'm not going to apologise for that because I think it's a fascinating subject. So over here, I'm going to particularly concentrate on violet, all right? We could have another broadcast about oranges, we could have another broadcast about greens, all sorts of things. But because my theme is amethyst, lavender and violet, I want to specifically look at violets. So let's look at them technically first. And let's go over to the paint box so that, look how clean this is, so that we can specifically look at how to mix them. There's my quinacridone magenta. There is my Prussian blue. Those are the colours I'm going to use to start with. But I am going to move this over to the left ever so slightly, move this stuff, have a bit of a tidy up. And so that you can see my palette at the same time. Let's push that a bit further. Get the water pot in. There we go. Job's a good one. So if I put quinacridone magenta here, QM, and I put Prussian blue here, okay, then I've got spaces in between to construct things. What I'm actually going to do is add an extra box in the middle. You'll get very comfortable with maths and a protractor and all sorts of things in the construction of your colour charts. I will let you put them together however you see fit. What I would strongly recommend is that no matter what you do on your colour chart, that you annotate it, that you label it, so that when you come back to look at it, you understand what it is that you have done. Now, in this case, one of the things that I would recommend that you do is to note down the brand of the paints that you are using, so that when you come to change your mind or upgrade your colours or alter the manufacturer or any of those kind of things, you're doing it from an informed point of view. So the Prussian blue that I'm using today is Daniel Smith's Prussian blue. Now, if you are a proper bona fide geek with your colour mixing, you may also want to note the pigment number. And the pigment number is the ingredient that goes into your paint. Because no matter what it says on the tube, not all Prussian blues are the same. They might use different pigments or different manufacturing processes. So if you feel that you're a bit more advanced and you've understood it all perfectly up to this point, then I would start to look at the ingredients of your paint and what goes into making it, so that you're getting really technical with it. Now, Daniel Smith's Prussian blue is a pigment called PB, which stands for Pigment Blue 27. So I'm going to note that down here as well, because that will help me if for some reason I decide I don't like this Prussian blue, but I fancy trying a different make. Now, that doesn't mean that I have to avoid PB 27. That just means that maybe De La Rowney's PB 27 is what I'm looking for, or Winsor & Newton, or Schminker, or Rembrandt, or any of those brands, okay? Over here on the quinacridone magenta side, horrible name drop coming up, wait for the clang, I'm going for the Alison Seaboard collection of watercolour paints. Clang! And the pigment that goes into my quinacridone magenta is PR, which stands for Pigment Red, number 122. So now I'm not only understanding the name of the colour, I'm not only understanding the bias that it might already have, I'm also understanding the pigment numbers. That's a whole other broadcast which we won't get to, but ho-hum, okay? And now, the first thing I'm going to do, incidentally, just as a bit of an aside, just to blow your brains even more, the paper that you do your colour mixing on also has a part to play. I'm using Hahnemuhle today, and it's not that the colours will look different. They're not going to sort of change their hue. They're not going to change, but they might change their intensity. So again, if you're really in the advanced stages of this, it would be interesting to do a colour mixing chart on Saunders Waterford, on Milford, on Bockingford, on Arsh, on Hahnemuhle, all of those kind of things. Like I said, see that rabbit hole that Hilary was talking, we are falling down it, clutching at things on the way down. Today I'm using Hahnemühle's Andalusia, okay? Now, first things first, let's get some colour onto this so that you can see the colours more clearly. This is my quinacridone magenta, so let's get that down here. And I can promise you that you will learn as much about the application of watercolour and water control and brush control in creating a colour chart like this than you will do from painting any subject matter. So understanding how much pressure you need to apply to paint a really nice, neat rectangle, how much colour you need on your brush, how much water you need, all of those kind of things. So not only are you doing yourselves a favour in understanding how to mix colour, you're also doing yourself a favour in understanding how much you need on your brush for this paint on this paper. So there's the quinacridone magenta. Here comes the Prussian blue. Incidentally, for this today, I am using SAA's Imitation Sable Brush because it comes to a nice fine point. I've squeezed my colour out into pans already, so because I don't like the consistency of paint when it comes out of the tube, and I don't like scrubbing away at the surface of a pan. So I squeeze my colour out into empty pans, allow it to dry, and then a touch of water just to bring it back together is the perfect consistency for me. You may find different. It is a personal choice. Not the neatest squares in the world, rectangles in the world. However, this is a live broadcast. I'm sure you will forgive me. So what I want to do now is to find my violet, find the one that's in between the two of them. Now, I would love to be able to tell you that it is 50-50. That if you took 50% quantity of the quinacridone magenta, 50% quantity of the Prussian blue, you'd get the perfect violet. But sadly, that is not the case. Because in some mixes, particularly in greens, when you're mixing greens, you'll find that one is far stronger in intensity than the other. So I usually say 50-50 intensity. And the way to do it, let's try to do it wrong first, shall we? So if I put a bit of Prussian blue down on my palette and I pick up masses and masses and masses of quinacridone magenta and I go, oh, let's add some more into it like that. Can you see that is very much pinker than it is blue? That is not my kind of halfway down the middle. The quinacridone magenta has overpowered the Prussian blue, and so what I've got there is a red violet, which I am going to need at some point, but not yet. So what you have to do is to make sure that when you mix the two together, and look at that, I've gone too blue now. Can you see that? Too much Prussian blue in there. And it will be a bit of a backwards and forwards style of technique when you start, which is fine. It's not a problem. It's all good. Now, look at that. Can you see, as I spread that out on my palette, in the camera, it does look a little bit too blue. So actually what I'm seeing live and what you're seeing in the camera are a bit different. There we go. That's a bit better maybe. Can you see that I can't honestly just see blue in that? I can see pink in it as well. The quinacridone magenta in there as well. Very interesting looking at it in the camera as opposed to what I'm seeing on here. But we'll do it from your point of view because that's more important. So that is what I would say is halfway down the middle. And what I'm going to do is paint this box in here. You could set yours up differently. This might be what you're doing on a colour wheel. It doesn't really matter. What does matter, incidentally, is that you allow sections to dry before you move on to the next one, particularly if you're clumsy like me and forever sticking your fist back in it. Use a bit of kitchen roll to control it if you feel that it's getting away from you. I've put gaps in between my boxes so that you don't have to sit and watch me dry. Now I can label that violet because it's straight down the middle. It is in between these two things, okay? But let's show you some blue violets and some red violets as well. So if we go back over here, whoops, dropping everything today. Let's take a bit of that colour and put it somewhere else. We'll come back to that puddle in a minute. Let's go for some red violets. So I'm going to take a bit of the quinacridone magenta and I'm going to just add a touch more. Can you see already how that is pinker than our previous one? And for that, I'm going to paint this rectangle in here. So it's still a violet, but because it's got more of the quinacridone magenta in it than the Prussian blue, it is what's known as a red violet. Okay, so we'll get that one painted in. So it's similar, just a little bit pinker. And then if we really push it, and we add lots more quinacridone magenta into that mix, and we pop it in here, that's a real proper red violet, isn't it? This colour that I'm painting in now, technically speaking, is what's known as purple. I know we call this purple, but technically this is much closer to purple than this. This is violet, this is purple. So can you see now? Got interesting steps towards it. Let's go the other way. Let's use this puddle. So we'll add a bit more of the Prussian blue into that. So again, you can see I've kind of deviated away from it. Let's go in here. It's got a bit more blue. That's a delicious colour, isn't it? That's kind of what I always look for when I'm shopping. So let's get this one in. Try to do it nice and quickly for you. What else do I need? A bit more of the Prussian blue in there to really kind of push it to a blue violet. I'm hoping that you're all still with me and I haven't lost you and you've gone, do you know what, Ali, I can do without learning this. I'm hoping that you're still finding this interesting. Coming over here. So it's not quite my Prussian blue. It's got a little bit more of the blue, it's got a little bit of the quinacridone magenta in it. Just sort of somewhere in between. Okay, so can you see? These are all violets, not those two. These are all violets, but what you've got over here is a violet that is biased towards your red, and over here you've got a violet that is biased towards your blue. Okay, I am hoping that you understand that. June has just asked a question. When I get the colours I want, how do I know how much I need for a project and can I go back to it after it's dried? I think, June, you're talking about when you perhaps mix a colour, whether you mix the right quantity. The question of how much do I need is, that's a never-ending question because it depends on all sorts of things. You might notice... if you go back and watch any of my broadcasts, you will notice that I very rarely mix on a palette. I tend to either choose the colour that I want or I pick up the colours and I allow them to mix on the paper. That way I'm not in that dilemma. I know that's not very helpful, but that way I'm not in that dilemma of how much do I need. My advice would always be mix 10 times more than you think you want, because you can always reconstitute it. You can always kind of make it wet again. You can go back, you can add another layer, all of those kind of things. If you practice this kind of colour mixing and this kind of colour theory, I promise you eventually you will know just by feel and by sight the kind of quantity you need to fill in whatever it is, a space, a subject, all of those kind of things. So June, I hope that has helped. Now I want to quickly touch on something else in colour mixing. I'm going to make it specific to violet, but that does not mean that this is the end of the conversation. And I'm just going to do a bit of cleanup because I still need my palette. Going to end up covered in it. Ooh, oh goodness, I think I'm putting down more than I'm cleaning off. There we go, that'll do. And I probably should change my water, but I can't do that at the moment. Let's go back to our colour wheel. I said we'd go back to it, didn't I? Let's just pick up the small version of it so that you can see it. And let's get it to the violet bit. So we've been talking about a blue that is biased towards violets and a red that is biased towards violets, okay? But that doesn't mean that different reds and blues won't make violet. You can still use the other red and the other blue. It's just that they won't make that kind of very clean, pure colour theory kind of violet. But if you're looking at your subject matter saying, well, I want a violet, but this is way too strong, I need something much more subtle than that, then it might be interesting to do what I would describe as off mixes. So here we've got Scarlet Lake Permanent Rose, French Ultramarine, and Windsor Blue Green shade. So we have been effectively mixing these two together, but there's nothing to say that you couldn't mix Scarlet Lake and Ultramarine together, nothing to say that you couldn't mix Windsor Blue Green shade with Permanent Rose. You will still get a violet, you'll just get a different sort of violet. So I'm going to pop this chart away and I'm going to pick up the other one that I had prepared for you. Here we go. So on this chart, you'll see all sorts of other things going on because I'm actually multitasking and I'm using this chart in another lesson that I've got this week. And down here, can you see I've got violet mixed, all right? So I've got down here on my colour wheel, I've already mixed Prussian blue and quinacridone magenta together. But down here, I've got Prussian blue and Scarlet Lake, cerulean and Scarlet Lake, cerulean and quinacridone magenta, and I've added an extra one on here because I use cobalt blue an awful lot as well. So one thing I am going to do is to note down the brands that I'm going to be using. So my Prussian blue is Daniel Smith. My Scarlet Lake is Winsor & Newton. So we'll put those in brackets underneath. My cerulean is Daniel Smith. And my Scarlet Lake is Winsor & Newton. So again, my cerulean is Daniel Smith. My quinacridone magenta is mine, so I'm going to put ACB on that. My cobalt blue is mine, so I'm going to put ACB down on that. And then my quinacridone magenta is mine as well. So you get to see a variety of makes. So this is what we would call off mixes. So let's do the first one. Stick with me. Stick with me. We're almost there. I hope this is helpful. So over here in my palette, let's find my Scarlet Lake. So I'm going to go for an off mix. So my Prussian blue is, as we have established, got a violet bias to it. But my Scarlet Lake has an orange bias to it. Dun, dun, dun. So let's go over here and see what we get out of that. Now that's interesting, isn't it? It's a violet of sorts. I think it's probably got a bit too much Scarlet Lake in it. It's a violet of sorts, but it's a much duller violet. Now you might be saying to yourself, why would I want to mix dull colours, Ali? You might want to mix a shadow colour. You might have trees casting a shadow across a white building, in which case you're probably not going to want a really kind of bright glow in the dark kind of violet for your shadows, you might want something more subtle. So rather than going backwards and forwards on your palette, adding a bit of brown or a grey or something else, it might be faster and cleaner to get to a duller violet by using your off mixes. Okay, so we've got our violet blue and our orange red in this one. Let's continue that thought. So this is my cerulean, which just seemed to have dog hair in it. So I haven't wet these, so I might just need to do a bit of work on these. So let's get my cerulean onto my palette, which is, incidentally, no matter whose brand of cerulean you buy, it is quite a weak pigment. So often when you're doing mixes with cerulean, you have to put much more cerulean than the other colour. So what did I say? Cerulean and Scarlet Lake. Incidentally, if you mix one and it's wrong, just if you write all of these things in pencil, you can just alter your annotation in pencil. You don't need to kind of think that you've done it badly. Oh, look at that. Push that. I used the tiniest amount of Scarlet Lake in there, and it's already gone too far one way. Now, if you're watching me thinking, well, how do you know it's gone too far one way, Ali? That's not helpful because I don't know what I'm aiming for. The unfortunate part of all of this process is that it's down to experience. I wish it wasn't, but it is. But there you can see we've got another violet, a slightly softer version than this one. Still a violet because it's still red and blue mixed together. But that's a really useful colour. And because I'm using cerulean, which is a granulating pigment, so one of those that produces an interesting texture, I'm actually getting it separating on the paper as well. Isn't that delicious? Who knew? I've surprised myself this morning. Who knew that cerulean and Scarlet Lake would produce that kind of mix? Now, what's my next one? Cerulean and Quinacridone Magenta. Now, I know this. I'm going to literally only show it the Quinacridone Magenta because Quinacridone Magenta, particularly my Quinacridone Magenta, is incredibly intense. Okay, so there's my cerulean. Let's give it a tiny touch of the Quinacridone Magenta. Woo, yeah, I didn't need much of that at all. Maybe a cough more. That's a bit too cerulean for my liking. I knew I was going to have to be careful. Are we there? Bit more. That's better. So again, that's a beautiful colour. And probably, as Hilary was saying earlier, probably closer to what would technically be classified as mauve. If you want to understand mauve, there's a really good book by an author whose name I'm going to sadly forget. If you know who it is, stick it in the chat. Really interesting book all about the history of mauve and where it came from, which I read a long time ago and I must revisit. That's lovely, isn't it? Isn't that beautiful? Really like that. And then the last one, just because cerulean and Prussian blue aren't the only colours that you can use to mix violet, I wanted to get some cobalt blue involved in it. Look how because that cerulean is so heavy, look how they're splitting on the palette as well. So coming over here, so this is my cerulean blue. And just in case you're wondering, oh, Ali, those colours look fabulous. Where could I get them from? There are two places that you can get them. You can either get them from my website or you can get them from the SAA. So there's my cobalt blue. And my cobalt blue pigment, incidentally, is PB72. So Kim is asking, what basic primary colours would you recommend for a beginner? A red, a blue and a yellow. So Kim, can you just give me a little bit more information? Are you talking about watercolour? Are you talking about acrylic? Are you talking about oil? Because they are different things for each. And just in case you might have missed the beginning of this broadcast, wind it back because I actually say that it's better to have a 6 primary system than it is a 3 primary system. So 2 reds, 2 blues and 2 yellows. But also, Kim, hold that thought because I'm going to say something very controversial in a minute, all right? Sorry to make it more complicated, but it would be remiss of me to not try to address everything. So there's my cobalt blue. Here goes my quinacridone magenta into it. Probably just a touch more, that's better. That's a lovely violet, isn't it? And pop this on the chart. You can go, as you might have seen, and you will certainly see at the end of this broadcast, over my left shoulder is a colour chart that I produced a good 20 years ago and is still going strong, which has so many variations of mix on it, and I still refer to it even now. So this kind of exercise is going to stand you in really good stead. So look at those, aren't they lovely? All violets, but very different violets. A sort of flower painting violet on this end, but maybe a shadow violet on this end. So Kim is saying, Kim, please don't apologise. So watercolour and acrylic. So Kim, yeah, go back to the beginning of the broadcast and you'll see why I say a 6 primary system. And in acrylics, it's not really that much different. And I know that there'll be tutors out there going, oh, Ali, it's loads different. Acrylic is not my speciality. Watercolour is. But I would be picking a green yellow, an orange yellow, a orange red and a violet red, and a violet blue and a green blue. However, look, the waggy finger is out. However, there is a school of thought, and we're going to get to it now, that says understanding colour theory is all fine and dandy. If you want to understand how to mix colours, how to get to them quickly, how to understand the mechanics of colour, then absolutely you should study colour theory, colour mixing. Go through this motion so that you understand the colours in your box and how to quickly get to some really bright, fresh versions or some off mixes, and understand how when you see a colour in your subject matter, how you can get to it by easily mixing things together. Okay, that is school of thought number 1. School of thought number 2 is that colour production has come on leaps and bounds in the last 20-30 years. So when I first started, there weren't very many colours to choose from. There weren't very good pre-mixed greens in a tube, pre-mixed violets, pre-mixed oranges. These were not things, in the 90s, these were not things that were easily available. Let's take, what should we take as a good example? Green. If you bought green in a tube pre-mixed, so your sap greens, your hookers greens, all of those kind of things, they didn't look natural. They just weren't. They were combinations of too many pigments in a tube. The way that, let's look at your face on so that you're not just looking at my hands. The way that colours were produced meant that we didn't have access to a whole heap of pigments, because our pigments as artists tend to come from much bigger industries, so car production, petrochemical industries, all of those kind of things. Because we didn't, those industries didn't have a huge variety of pigments to choose from. Where it trickles down into art, our pigments were a bit limited, but that is not the case anymore. We have people who work with colour, particularly those people that work with artists, who go to huge lengths to acquire pigments that are stable, that are intense, that are interesting to apply. And so now you can buy pre-mixed oranges, greens, violets, whatever colour you want in a tube. So there is a school of thought, and I am the tutor that buys into this, that actually if you bought a tube of colour and you understood what was in it, in terms of what pigments are in it, that rather than trying to mix everything very thoughtfully all the time, that maybe if you chose them more carefully, you could get there faster rather than having to go through this process of mixing everything all the time. So there are a couple of people who, if you're on the YouTube chat, who are putting authors' names up for other books that you should read as well. Absolutely, go and read these people. I need to revisit them again. It is, there's lots of books about travel to do with pigment, all sorts of other things as well. It's fascinating. If you like this part of it, then it's really fascinating. So the last thing that I want to share with you today as we head into the last 10 minutes of this Technique Tuesday are those colours, those violets particularly, that I would choose pre-mixed, done already in a tube, rather than having to mix my violet all the time. As you can appreciate, I use violet a lot in my work. If you look at any of my work, look, it's got violet all over it. Okay, there's that colour chart, by the way. So let's have a look at 3 of my favourite violets, and then hopefully you'll understand why I have pre-mixed ones rather than mixing my violets all the time. So let's go back to that overhead camera. And what I need to do is to find them in my box. So I'm going to share 3 with you today. This is by no means the end of this conversation. I had to seriously think of ways that I could get to the bottom of this without us still being here into the wee small hours of the morning. So I have got for you Moon Glow, Ultramarine Violet, and Rose of Ultramarine. Okay. So let me take you through a bit of annotation first. I need to clear a space. So Moon Glow, that is a Daniel Smith colour. Now this is very much a convenience colour, because this is all the things that shouldn't work in a tube. It's got 3 pigments in it, which is always dangerous, because the chances are that if you mix it with another paint that's got loads of pigments in it, then you'll be in trouble. But it's got 3 pigments in it. So it's PG18, so that's pigment green 18. It's PB29, so that's pigment blue 29. And what's the other one? PR177, pigment red 177. Okay, so that is a lot of pigment in there. But if you've watched my work before, you'll know I am quite the fan of Moon Glow, and you'll soon see why. Let me add a bit of water. As you can see, I need to squeeze some more out. It is a much used colour in my box. Let's, oh, dog hair. Let's fill this in, because it is a rather beautiful shadow violet that has a huge mass tone. And by that, what I mean is it can be used very pale or very dark. So you get all sorts of tonal values out of it. Let's fill that bottom corner in. So you get to that lovely kind of shadow version very quickly. Isn't that delicious? What's not to like about that? I'm going to go for Rose of Ultramarine, because I want to end on a high. I'm going to go for Rose of Ultramarine. This is also a Daniel Smith colour. And Rose of Ultramarine has 2 pigments in it. So it has PB29, pigment blue 29. As you can see, pigment blue 29 is also in Moon Glow. And it has PV19. And so that's pigment violet 19. And it's very pink, but it's still kind of I class it as a violet as opposed to a red. But you might think differently when you see it. Can you see it's that kind of red violet as we have been discussing? So let's get that filled in. Beautiful. If you like flower painting, this is a delicious colour to have in your box. I also like using it as a bit of a feature colour in backgrounds. But if you like painting hellebores or fuchsias or any of those kind of subject matter, Rose of Ultramarine is a rather lovely one to have in your box. Also, lots of people saying Moon Glow is a useful colour. Yeah, Julie also pointing out that Daniel Smith has a colour called Shadow Violet, which is also very good. As you can appreciate, I have a lot of them in my box. I had to just pick a few. We only have an hour together. I could still be going. And Suzanne is saying that she used Moon Glow for a colour in her painting of a black dog. So yeah, absolutely, because not all dogs are black, or not all black dogs are black. Now this last one, here comes the name drop again. Ultramarine Violet. So this is my Ultramarine Violet. So the Alison Seaboard collection. And this one's just got 1 pigment in it. Okay, just the one. Keeping it nice and simple. This is PV, so it's pigment violet again, but it's 15. And let me show you, because we need to end on an alley sort of violet, don't we? If we are talking about mixing violets. Let's go over here. Let's mix it up a little bit and pop it down. Now, isn't that just the most delicious thing ever? You can probably see now why I chose it as a colour in my range. So again, if you enjoy flower painting, it's beautiful. One of the other reasons that I chose it is because if you mix it with a black, so something like black iron oxide, you get to a shadow colour really quickly, and it granulates really beautifully as well. Just in case you're wondering what's happened over here, I managed to drop a bit of water into my colour chart, so I'm getting a nice cauliflower occurring over there. Always the way, isn't it? So you've got the Daniel Smith Moon Glow, the Daniel Smith Rose of Ultramarine, and you've got my Ultramarine Violet there too. So there you have a little chart of violets that are mixed, and these are our off mixes. And here you've got some violets that you might consider purchasing just straight in a tube, because you don't always need to mix everything, okay? You find your way through it. I used to be that tutor that said, no, you must mix everything. You must use just a few colours. But to be honest, I've kind of moved on from that now. And I usually say that if you're inspired to use a colour, so if you want to use a violet and you want to have it straight out the tube, that you don't really want to mix it all the time, then buy one. If you feel inspired to use Moonglow because just the name is delightful, then absolutely be that person. Just experiment with it. No one can tell you how to paint. I can only tell you how I paint. These are the decisions that I have made. These are not the decisions that you will make. Take what I've said, take what other artists have said, put it all together and make it your own. Now, if you will, just bear with me while I just show you where you can find some of this information and where you can watch this broadcast back. You might be there already, but just in case you're not, let's go over to the website. This is the time to get your questions in. I'm pointing over here because that's where the chat is, on that live chat as well, so that I can answer them before the broadcast ends. But let's just quickly go to the website. Here is the website, www.learningtopaint.co.uk, and your menu might look a little bit different to this, but there's masses of information on there. You will need the blog part of it, and then if you scroll down, honestly, you could spend days looking through my blog. There's so much information on there now. There is that Technique Tuesday for February. That is where you will find all the information for today. There's some of the Ask Ali things that we've been talking about. You'll find, I'll talk about the month ahead in just a second. You might also be interested in my new Pay As You Learn creative tutorials as well, where if you don't fancy signing up for a big day course or signing up for a membership for something, these are standalone courses. I'm working on them. In fact, I'm filming some this afternoon. But where are we? What have we been doing recently? We've been doing a pastel one. So that one is available now. In line with our lavender part of our prompt this week. There's a lavender field in pastel, and you can see there next month we've got an impressionistic butterfly there too. So plenty for you to enjoy over on the website, and take a bit of time to go through it. My website has become such a huge thing now that you kind of need to sit down with a cup of coffee, don't you, and work your way through it. But lots there for you to enjoy. I'm picking up my notes because I have to remember what to say to you. If you want to find me on social media, just look for @AliBoardArtist, and I'll pop the website address up there as well so that it gives you a reminder of where to find me. I'm going to be back. Technique Tuesday is back on the 5th of March, and on the 5th of March we have part of our theme is going to be bugs, bees and butterflies. I'm going to be doing a metallic moth. Why metallic? Because I felt like it, but I am going to be doing it on black watercolour paper. So if you enjoy working on a dark surface or you've never tried it before, then tune into that one. That's going to be on the 5th of March. But I have lots of things still to come up for you in February. There's our 6th, our Technique Tuesday mixing violets. We've got a workshop coming up doing artichoke flowers. There's a tips and tricks broadcast going out on YouTube, which is going to be Morning Glory, which is gelatin plate with Posca pens. And so all of this information can be found on the website. And I think probably I've seen some lots of information coming in on the chat. Oh, Hillary's called it a masterclass. Thank you. That's as good a compliment as you get. Thank you, Hilary. Lots of people saying thank you. Stephen is saying, looking forward to me doing greens. I think that probably is one. I think that's probably going to be something for the future. That could run the green version. Ali is saying, reminded her that you need to renew all the labels on her pans because most are illegible. Yeah, you do have to update those from time to time. Thea is saying, my head is buzzing. Sorry about that. Thank you, Ali. I will need to watch this live many times for it to fully sink in. Yeah, please do. Go back, rewatch it as many times as you like. Because actually, if you keep rewatching it, helps me out enormously with the number of hours that people watch things on YouTube. So please go back and watch it as many times as you like. I hope that I haven't made your heads buzz too much, but I also hope that that was helpful. And even if it wasn't helpful, that it was an interesting way to spend a Tuesday morning. Thank you very much for taking the time to tune in. There's been so many of you in the room and in the chat this morning, so I appreciate that greatly. Until I see you online or in person, take lots of care of yourselves, won't you? Bye.